Hi, welcome to the Simsbury Free Library. We're glad to have you all here. We're giving they're giving a program, the Band of Brothers Travel Guide to World War II. This is Jim Artocchio, who lives in Simsbury with his wife, Lisa, and two sons. He's a former high school student, Simsbury High School student himself, graduated in 1997. Has been a social studies teacher at Simsbury High School since 2007. He's also the varsity lacrosse coach and JV hockey coach at Simsbury High School. And then we also have Jeff Osborne. He lives in Simsbury with his wife, Suzanne, and two sons. He got his Bachelor of Science in History and Education and his Master's of Education in Coaching and Leadership at Springfield College and his Certificate of Advanced Studies in Educational Leadership at CCSU. Welcome, Jim and Jeff, and everybody sit back and enjoy the show.
Thank you very much for the nice welcome. It's great to be here. This is a wonderful place to be having a little discussion on history. I feel like a historian just standing in the room here. This is awesome. So Jeff and I were given a great opportunity over the summer to travel around primarily Germany on a grant that we received through a company called Fund for Teachers. It's an extension of the Dalio Foundation, who Ray Dalio, if you know him, he's one of the largest hedge fund. He owns one of the largest hedge fund companies in the state of Connecticut. Very wealthy individual, and he provides every year through his wife Barbara, actually is the one that's in charge of it, provides teachers with opportunities to go explore their passions, really. And the unique thing about the Fund for Teachers experience is that what makes it different than other grants is you design the grant yourself. So one of the things that Jeff and I had to do in order to kind of figure out what is it that we want to explore as history teachers, what are the opportunities for us? What would be something that we can bring back to our students and make it a worthwhile experience, not only for us to travel, but for them as learners? And we came to the idea of World War II. We thought World War II was a great place to kind of explore our some of the units that we and some of the topics that we teach throughout history. Now, my wife Lisa, who also teaches in the district, she's a Spanish teacher. I have to give her credit. This was all her idea. The year before, she applied for this grant and received the grant. And it's a very generous grant. They give you $10,000 to basically do what you want with, if they accept your proposal, which is very generous. So Lisa and a teacher colleague of hers applied to receive a grant 2 years ago, and they were able to go to Argentina, and they spent about 2 weeks in Argentina. Exploring the countryside, exploring the cities, and they had one of the most amazing experiences, and she came home ranting and raving about it, saying, you have to do this, you have to apply, you have to apply. So I said, all right, let's do it. So Jeff and I began our journey actually in school, trying to think about what topics we wanted to discover. We typed up our grant, which was pretty extensive. It was no easy thing to do, and a couple of weeks later, after some review and some other things that we had to do, we were surprised at school actually by the company coming into school. Other members that had once been accepted for the grant came in with backpacks and travel journals, and they came into our lunch and they surprised us and said, "Congratulations, you got the grant." And we couldn't believe it. We were ecstatic. We had no idea. And it was that sort of began our journey. So we, at that point, were asked to go to essentially what would have been like an inauguration ceremony thing, where you go and they give you your check and you have a nice dinner and you meet all of these other people that are going on these grants. And the thing that makes them so unique, like I said, is that you create them yourself. So our thing was, we really want to take a look at Germany during World War II. We want to explore the rise and fall of the Nazis. We want to go in and look at what was happening in Germany during World War II and get a different perspective that we could bring back and talk to our students about. And I think we not only got that, but so much more out of it. The questions that we came up with, the enduring understandings that we as teachers brought back was just tremendous in the 10 days that we had a chance to go over there. So we've done this little we've done a little talk about our proposal a couple of times now. We've had to, we've done a couple of presentations at the high school, more so to tell teachers about the opportunity, because this is really a tremendous opportunity for teachers. And this is actually the first time that Jeff and I have been able to come out and actually talk about the experience from a historical standpoint. Usually when we're at school, we don't get a chance to go up there and talk about our 10 days exploring, you know, the rise and fall of Hitler and the World War II Germany. We get to talk about the grant. So this is the first time we really get a chance to sit down with people that want to hear the historical side of things and hear about the history of it all. And that's why we're so excited. So we put our trip together in a little slideshow for everybody today. And we basically broke it down the same way that we traveled. Jeff's going to do a little bit of the sort of travel log for you. He's going to take you through the 10 days that we had. And I'll interject here and there, but we were able as history teachers to just truly gain so much knowledge on a topic that we've taught now for years and years, but it's amazing what you can experience and how much more enrichment you can bring to these lessons by actually going to these places and seeing them firsthand. And it was just a tremendous experience. So we'll hopefully be a little bit of tour guide for you, a little bit of historian, a little bit of teacher jargon here and there, but we really just wanted the opportunity to share our stories with people that were willing to listen. So we were able to do 10 days in Germany. We also explored Austria and parts of the Czech Republic. And we even, and I'll talk about this at the end, were able to get a little bonus trip to Washington, D.C. We had we had some funds left over, believe it or not. We didn't eat all of the food and drink all of the beer that we possibly could have enough in Germany, that we still had some money left over. And the grant company was generous enough to say, you know what? Why don't you take another day somewhere local? You don't have to go to Germany, obviously, but what can you do? What can you use this funding for? And we said, boy, how about going to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.? And so they let us go to a night in D.C., and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But it really was a great culmination of all of the trip, and it tied in a lot of different topics. And so I'm excited to tell you a little bit about that. But for the Germany experience and our trip through Germany, I'm going to bring my colleague Jeff Osborne up, and he's going to start with our trek through Germany and our virtual tour here. And I will chime in as I see fit. Yep. Jeffrey, take it over.
So the one thing about what we did was we had 10 days just because that was really our limitations in our lives. We have all, young families, so they give you a good amount of grant money, but we had to do it in 10 days. So first off, you have to think, okay, well, if we're going to do it in 10 days, how are we going to do it? We got to do it first class, number one. So when we're out there in Germany and Austria and the Czech Republic, we had a couple rules that we followed in our trip through the areas. And the rules really were have to stay at a hotel, right, that has all-you-can-eat breakfast in the morning, give you enough fuel to get out throughout the day and do all the traveling. So you could see, and the other thing that we always did was the first day we got to a city, we'd explore on our own. The second day we hired a guide. So if this is something for you to go out and do this trip, this is a great trip, the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Hiring guides is like, you got to do it. Because on our days of exploring, it's like this. Like he's standing next to me, it's bothering me. Like walking through a city, not knowing where you are in Europe. But then on the second day, we'd have somebody pick us up at our hotel and take us to all the different sites, and it was really worthwhile. So hiring a guide on a trip like this would be really important. So,
were you telling me to move?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right.
We argue all the time. So, as you can see, we flew into Munich. And again, it's all a couple days in Dachau's right outside of Munich. We'll get into it. We went to Salzburg and Berchtesgaden after that. Just geographically, it made sense, and we backtracked to Nuremberg, over to Prague. That was Jim's idea because we were kind of trying to fill in the gap. Do we go to Dresden? We wanted to stay on the eastern side And he came up one day in school, he's like, why don't we do Prague? And we started, okay, this is going to be great because I would highly recommend going there. There's a lot of World War II history in Prague. And then from Prague, we went up to Berlin. And we rented a car in Munich, traveled up to down to the Bavarian Alps, over to Nuremberg, dropped off the car, and traveled by train, which was awesome. For the rest of the trip, and if we have time, we could give you the rental car story also. So this is basically how we're going to do. We're going to go through days. And day one, Munich. This picture here is obviously Adolf Hitler. This is at the beer hall Push in Munich in 1923, and this is really the start of the rise of the Nazi party system. And it's really a bunch of out of work World War I veterans hungry for a change. Okay. And that's some of the chaos that happens after. So basically a failed coup in Munich to overthrow the local government in Munich. The men who started this in this room came out into the streets, they're all riled up, and they're arrested and put in jail. Okay, so it was a failed coup, 1923. At this time, you're in the Weimar Republic. The Emperor Wilhelm is done after World War I. And in a parliamentary system, as we talked, like in government class, Madison's taking notes very good, there's many parties struggling. There's right-wing parties like the Nazi Party, there's left-wing parties, Social Democrats and the Communist Party, they're all vying for power at this time. So a failed coup attempt, and I like to use this in school. And the other thing about this presentation, a lot of these slides, we didn't get to share a lot with our colleagues, but we share this with our students, and that's what it was really all about. So I do like this. He took it out, I put it back in. When you're looking at this, you could just see by 1933, the Nazi Party is in full control, and Hitler's a dictator in Germany. And you could see all the different parts, but really the competing parts with the Nazi Party, they're really not having any seats in the parliament until 1928. So everything up to 1928 was really momentum gathering, and that's what we saw in Munich, and that's what we saw in Nuremberg, the momentum gathering. And you could see the Social Democratic Party, the Communist Party, and where they were with the seats.
Can I interject?
Sure.
So the other thing that Jeff and I have the opportunity to do as teachers in the high school is we both teach the same. We have the same classes that we teach. U.S. history, which was honestly the driving force for this trip, was more the U.S. history perspective of it. But we also teach advanced placement politics and government. So we have a government background as well going in. We wrote it into our grant that we both teach politics and government, and we actually were hoping to be able to go and study some more of the government element of things. I think we found that while the history part was wonderful, we gained a ton of information about government, comparative governments, and looking at how government works, and looking at the ramifications of certain human emotions on government and how important that is. And I think kind of how it all tied back together, we got that little trip to DC at the end, tying it back together and going to the home of our government was a really nice tie-in to everything, because it brought a lot of questions up, and it also answered a lot of questions about the power of government and about what governments are capable of. And I think that just sort of jogged my memory on that. And I want to get into a little bit more on that when we get to DC, but we had the political element of this trip as well. So
it was fun. It was fun to talk to people, just the tour guides and people at dinner, and talking about healthcare system in Germany and getting their opinions on things like that, and gun control and the issues that we have compared to the issues that they have in Germany. So a lot of the fun stuff was at night at dinner and just meeting people like you and just talking.
Speaking of which.
So beer hall, Push, we had to try a beer hall. So again,
we had to try a beer hall.
See some of our fun stuff along with the history, because that's what it's all about. So that's Hofra House. This is an old school beer house in Munich, and built in 1589 for just the noble class, and by 1828 the public was admitted, all bombed during World War II. And that's another theme in these cities. These cities have all been rebuilt since World War II. 80% destruction of the beer hall, and it reopened. It took until 1958 to reopen it, and we met great people here from Colorado, a family, and it was just a really fun kind of kickoff. The facades, the buildings in Munich, although they look beautiful and they look old, this is one of the things that happened after the war, rebuilding and just painting, and it's not really plaster or cement. A lot of it's artwork that's been drawn onto these, and they're fake. They're not the original 14th century, 15th century, 16th century buildings, but they're meant to look that way. And you find this theme all through Europe. 80% of Munich was destroyed by Allied air attacks. And that's us leaving Munich and moving on. Cheap wine. In the parks, it was about 100 degrees when we were over
Heat
there in
wave.
the summer, and they weren't ready for that. The hotels didn't have strong air conditioning. But the big park in Munich, we found these people surfing in the park. We thought that was pretty cool, just in general. So the next day, Dachau, day 2, first concentration camp that Hitler, built or established. What we found was newspaper articles after newspaper articles promoting these camps. So what was seemingly, what I thought as a historian, it was going to be a secret, nobody knew. The Allied forces, like if you watch the series Band of Brothers, they get to these camps. They were establishing work camps, and it was being portrayed in local newspapers what they were doing. Anybody know what that is? Can you read it,
Yeah.
Sarah?
Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free.
Yeah, work sets you free. So a lot of the camps have this. Our takeaway, at least mine, immense, the size of these camps. And then different camps, and there's Dachau. The green are the work camps, and unfortunately the red are the death camps, and they were everywhere.
And that's not to say that the work camps, like Dachau was created as a work camp, but many of those camps during the final solution, which was essentially created by Hitler in the, further towards the end of the war for Germany at least, many of the camps became death camps, essentially. The ones that were in red there were ones that systematically were built to become actual camps where people were killed. But even in Dachau, you can't go into that camp and say, oh, this was just a work camp. Yes, it was created at first for political prisoners, more so than ever. It's right outside of Munich, so it was one of the first ones that was built, and most of the people that were originally there were political prisoners. And by the end of the war, though, they show you the progression of these camps and how they're built. Dachau began as a political prison with this ample space, but then they just keep building and building and building and building, and you see these rows and rows of what were the barracks and the housing, and it's horrifying. It really is.
No citizen would ever say that they didn't know this was happening in a lot of the different places that we visited. It's just too big. Dachau is so big that the barracks for the soldiers that worked Dachau had places for family to stay, and also in the back of Dachau there was a zoo for the children of the soldiers to visit. So it was just like really embedded into the city centers. And Dachau is about 12 miles northwest of Munich. So if you're into Munich, you can head to Dachau on a day trip. And we just put in some different historic pictures and pictures that we took. And it's just hard to explain the size at the camp. Okay, little video. Let me click it.
Yeah, sure, why not?
So this is where we're heading next. See if it
1,000 feet up, accessible by a gold-plated elevator. It was one of the crown jewels of his empire, and the man was afraid of heights.
This is from Band of Brothers, for those that don't know the series.
Sam? No, goddamn it, listen. Hitler, no.
Hey, Adolf! Love your Eagles Nest. I hope you don't mind. We made ourselves at home. Love what you done with the place here. Hey, have it.
So that's where we're heading. We're going up to the Eagle's Nest. And I'm not sure how to make this big again. Jim, do you know how to make it big?
I'll work on it. You keep going.
And we'll just talk. So we showed that clip to our students each year, and when we're going to Germany, we had to go up to the Eagle's Nest and Birch's Garden, and what we learned there was way more than we ever taught our students, because Obersalzberg is a village north of Birch's Garden up in the high valley, and that's a picture from in the 1920s, a colored picture, and it's a spot where Hitler went before the beer hall push as just a solo traveler, and he goes up into a cabin and he stays there and he thinks and gathers his thoughts, and he comes back after and he writes the second part of Mein Kampf in Obersalzberg.
I'll let you do it.
So I think you just have to hit escape and then you'll
Oh,
get back
escape?
in.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Present. Thank you.
And there we are.
Tech guru.
Scenic landscape, 1923. So again, after the beer hall push, he was arrested. He was in prison. He wrote the first part of Mein Kampf, and then he came back up to Obersalzberg, the mountain retreat, and he wrote the second part. This was a spot where the Nazi party really flourished. So we were at Munich at the start, and now we're really at stage 2 up in the Bavarian Alps. So this is a beautiful spot. Top figures, we'll lose it here. So what they did was Göring, Goebbels, Bormann, Himmler, Speer, they started to buy up acreage, and eventually they owned a vast amount of land. And basically what you can see, this is from midway up the peak down, this was all owned by Nazis. That was a hotel we stayed at, that's a Kempinski resort, very nice, right below. And that's a spot. That's from us actually eating dinner outside of our hotel, looking up with a lens.
It was really a unique. So I guess the best way to describe it, you're looking at a essentially vacation home for arguably one of the worst human beings to ever be brought onto this planet. Yet you're staring up at this down from the village, you know. And the interesting thing was, one of the themes that kept coming up in our trip was the theme of how do you remember history? Like what do you have out there that you use to remember history? What are you willing to keep to remind people of certain things, and how do you portray that those things to people? There's so many times where we walked into some of these places and we just said to ourselves, you know, this is so powerful, but also just so evil and so hard to look at. The concentration camp was obviously one of the biggest things. But then, you know, you also have this. So the way in which, especially in Germany, the different ways that they keep these things going for either learning purposes. In this case, they didn't take the Eagle's Nest down. They blew up everybody else's homes in Obersalzberg that owned property there. Göring's home. Hitler even had a home down in the valley. They blew them up. That was they got rid of them. They kept the Eagle's Nest. They didn't get rid of it. And actually what ended up happening with the Eagle's Nest was that the American army essentially took it over. And for up until, I think, Jeff, was it 96 maybe? 1996, the Americans essentially occupied the Eagle's Nest. And when they finally gave it back to the Bavarian government, they were kind of like, what do we do with this? What do we want to do? Do we want to get rid of this? I mean, imagine, like, it's like staring up at Hueblein Tower. You know what I mean? It's right there. You can't miss it. It's in your face. And the symbolism of what it stood for is just, it's not something that you would want to be proud of seeing, but they never got rid of it. And what they did, which I thought was really what we were able to witness when we were there, was as soon as the Americans gave it back to the Bavarian government, they built a tremendous amount of historic museums and things around it to teach people about what was going on. The people of Ober-Salzburg in this, Jeff mentioned that they bought up property, they bought up land. Well, they didn't have a choice. It's not like they went knocking on the people's doors and said, hey, would you mind selling us your land? They forced people out of this area.
Right, they bought and evicted.
And evicted people to make this their retreat. And the sort of juxtaposition of looking at just the horrible actions of that type of behavior and what the Eagle's Nest stood for Hitler versus the beauty of this place was just, it was something that was hard to describe. And yet the things that we learned the most were going to these documentation centers, essentially the museums, where they spell out everything that happened there. And you see that and you're like, wow, I'm glad that I get to see this and understand what it is, but it is right there in your face and you can still see it. The same way when we went to Nuremberg and the rally grounds are still right there in your face. It's all there.
That's what we were struggling with. That sitting in a resort hotel, looking up at a jewel to Adolf Hitler. So that was really it. All the funds. That's a good point. All the funds that you pay to go to the documentation centers, and there's tons of these around. The first documentation center was actually built in 1943 in Grenoble, France. So the documentation centers are really where you can go read the documents and make your judgment on history. All the funding and all the the receipts of people that go there, it goes to the education system in Germany. So like traveling up to the Eagle's Nest, it goes to the educational system. So you would go to the documentation center, you'd buy a bus ticket for $15, and the buses were all specially made buses for the high mountain travel with big time shocks and adjustments. And you would take the bus right up to about 600 feet below, and then you have a choice of either climbing or taking the gold-plated elevator up to the top, and no pictures allowed in the elevator. We got a little snapshot of, going down towards the elevator. So what we did was we climbed up and took the elevator down and snuck some pictures. So a really great part of our trip was this mountain time. There's Jim.
That's me.
It was just important for us. And again, the breakfast, right? You have to have the big breakfast before you go out. Pretzels in all different fashions. So from there we went over to Nuremberg, took our rental car, went to Nuremberg, and this was really, this after Munich, over to Nuremberg as far as where the Nazi party centered itself. And this is where you would have these massive rallies and indoctrination of the party members. So this is the rally grounds from up in the air. And again, the same thing, like with the Eagle's Nest, a lot of the different parts of this are still standing, and the Zeppelin fields and the Congress Hall, and you ask why is it still there? Again, it was about 104 degrees on this day. Jimmy actually went down in Nuremberg, so he doesn't really know much about Nuremberg. He got sick, so we had to drive him back to the hotel. He stayed there for 2 days, so I had to do a lot of this. And you remember a lot of this, so forgive me. But the Zeppelin fields or the party grounds, it's immense. It's unbelievable. We had a tour guide at this time. He wouldn't even take us up there because he goes, by the time we get up there in this heat, we might not make it back. And it was literally 104 degrees in Nuremberg. It was the hottest part of the trip. This to me was very interesting. This is an unfinished part of the party grounds. This was the Congress Hall. It was meant to end up looking like this. A lot of what you see is Roman architecture. It was never finished, but we stood basically right in the middle. And there's a documentation center there also. So Nuremberg's a really important place to go and visit to try to understand what was going on. The rallies were large, up to 500,000 people at the Zeppelin fields. When party members came to Nuremberg, schools would be closed, and they used the schools to house people, so you had a place to stay and some shelter. And it would be, as you can see,
They covered all the floors in the schoolhouses with straw and hay so people could sleep there. They packed millions of people into that city, and it's not a very big city. And it was where essentially Hitler wanted to set up his new Rome, really. And that's how come he wanted to design everything in that manner. And the expansive, I did get a chance to see this before I went down, but the expansiveness of the Zeppelin fields and of the areas that they held these grounds, again, are still there, but in ruins. It's odd. And there's stacks of marble and granite that were never used. They never got to building some of the stuff that they wanted to build, and they're just sitting there still, like stacks of it.
basically over here on the Congress Hall, just unfinished. So the relic that they used, there was one relic that came from the beer hall push to tie it back to Munich. It was called the blood flag, and that's what they would use to indoctrinate the SS on one Sunday. So this would be like your Democratic National Convention, your Republican National Convention. Once a year, party members descended into Nuremberg, and they had their rallies and indoctrination, and you would have a new crop of SS troops after this, and so on. So this is Nuremberg after bombings. So we've seen Munich 80%, Nuremberg 80 to 85% bombed out, and that would be the old town of Nuremberg, which is, again, it's beautiful now, and it's meant to look like it was. And it's amazing, the architecture. And again, we have hundreds of pictures. We just couldn't put them all on here. We were just trying to do things to make the presentation work tonight. The train station in Nuremberg, which we took off to Prague at this point. Oh, and the one thing I will say, the tour that we did, if you're going to go, the tour that I did, he didn't do it.
I made it about an hour and a half into the
It was called the
tour.
World War II and Beer Tour, so I don't know if some people are into that.
Just so you know, I went down before the beer part. That's the worst part. Like, if I had gone down because of the beer part, that would have been one thing. I actually went down in the rally grounds and...
Don't tell Ray Dalio. But we actually did learn a lot. I learned a lot about what was going on with beer in the medieval times, and I'd like to just share some of that, like the beer purity law. So the World War II and Beer Tour, what that was you did the grounds, you did a lot of the history in the morning, and then in the afternoon he took the tour guide would take you, and it was just me and the tour guide, to 4 different breweries and learn about the beer. So the German beer purity laws, which were adopted in Bavaria in 1516, don't drink the water. Don't drink the water, drink the beer, and no wheat. That was part of the law. So the German beer, no wheat in the beer because the wheat was for the bread. And we went to one of the breweries, and the tour guide, he goes, well, do you know what that is? And well, the Star of David, yes. But also it meant, as far as beer goes, the symbol looks identical. It had the 3 elements used in brewing on top: water, earth, and fire, and then the 3 known ingredients on the bottom: water, malt, and hops. And yeast had,
Barley.
Yeah, hops or barley, depends. That's German beer. It's either hops, barley, no wheat. So just interesting, a great tour, and we have all the information if you're interested. Right, this is a little bit about it. Going on tour. We have all the contacts. We have all the tour guides. Great tour guides. Highly recommend all the tour guides and all the accommodations.
Very reasonable.
During the trip, yeah, very reasonable.
Especially when somebody gives you $10,000 to do it.
Yeah. So we spent like half of it, and then we had to fix our rental car, and we had to go to Washington D.C. We'll talk about that later if we have time. So took the train from Nuremberg to Prague. Great idea. Jim had to go to Prague. I didn't think to do this. Learned a lot about Prague and also Pilsen. Speaking of beer and Pilsner beer. So we basically came in on this route, and this will come back because this is as far as Patton gets. So Patton actually liberates Pilsen, which I didn't know. So there were so many things that I learned on this trip that were great. And then just the history of Prague and the beauty of Prague and the crossroads of history and the different groups that were from the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburgs, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so many different cultures kind of blended into this great city. Highly recommend
Absolutely.
going to it, Charles IV and everything else. So, occupied before the invasion of Poland, so it was pretty much Poland. And when we're teaching U.S. history, we always use September 1st, 1939 as the start date of any type of combat in Europe. So this was part of the annexation. This was after the Sudetenland was annexed to Germany, and then they moved right into Prague by March 15th. These are pictures of Hitler actually visited Prague as they're creating space and resources. Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia was a great place for iron, steel, and hopefully a gateway to some oil fields eventually. You'll see this in history books. You don't want to be in the center of the Red Army when they start to close in on you because they didn't play by the rules. And we saw this, which was really cool, Russian tank and a Panzer. But Prague was surrounded and liberated by the Soviets really in May 1945, so at the very, very end of World War II, liberated by the Soviets. And that's another part of this that I learned and Jim learned, and those are Soviet troops looking at the Volta River and the Charles Bridge, which is an icon of Prague, colorized. I'll talk about this now, I guess. I had no idea Patton was in Czechoslovakia, and Pilsen was our first stop. We had to change trains, very different from a German train to a Czech train. Air conditioning, no air conditioning, roomy German trains. Czech trains are still, I felt like I was kind of rolling through the Cold War at points. But we got out in Pilsen, and Pilsen's known for Pilsner beer. That's where Pilsner beer comes from. 35 crowns, and not to think we went on a beer tour, but the beer is cheaper than water in the Czech Republic. But I didn't realize Patton got this far. And this is where the line of contact, that's a term that we use in warfare history. The line of contact was met right outside of Pilsen, which meant the Soviet troops and the American troops met down there. And Patton, if you've read Killing Patton, Patton just wanted to go straight. He knew at this time the enemy was not the Germans. He knew the enemy was going to be the Soviets, and he wanted to just keep moving east. And because of Yalta and the agreements, he had to get out of Czechoslovakia at this time.
Begrudgingly.
The other piece to this, which I have found interesting, is the Soviets could have taken Berlin much quicker, and this is something that I learned just reading. It was really like a vertical slow play. They took lands and they stopped. And what I mean by vertical slow play is they started to indoctrinate the Eastern countries before the end of the war. So the Eastern Bloc nations already had a lot of communist background within due to the Soviet occupation before the May of 1945, really from late 1944. As we're fighting Battle of the Bulge, the Soviets are waiting, and they're waiting for a sense. They're waiting to see what happens on the Western Front, but they're also starting to indoctrinate places like the outskirts of Prague and Romania, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia at this time. So, great city. Again, and there's, kind of what's going to turn into the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. Great tour guides, that's our symbol, our Fun for Teachers symbol.
Jewish cemetery, Jewish ghettos, they had them there.
Yeah, it's been a spot where Jewish citizens have lived for a long, long time in Prague. The Holocaust at Prague citizens were swallowed up by the German forces after 1939. Lenin's Wall in Prague, the soup that finally cured Jimmy, I had to put it up there, that foe brought him back to life. And then taking the train up to Berlin.
Prague is a wonderful place. It was absolutely, as we've both taught world history, we've taught U.S. history, and it just brings together so many eras of time, and it's so well preserved, and it's just a wonderful city.
Yeah.
We were really pleasantly surprised.
Our tour guide in Prague he did it through historical times. So he went from medieval times to Soviet times to the Czech Republic in 1993, and he just did it in a great way. We went to a medieval lunch in some dark basement, and
It was cool.
it was really good. Not a great picture, but that's the train station back in Berlin. So Prague to Berlin. Again, these tickets are like they were like maybe $25 each to go from Prague to Berlin, from Nuremberg to Prague. So, and the trains were awesome. They run like exactly on time. So we finished off in Berlin. You see these bullet marks all over Berlin. That was something that I really was. I mean, I knew there was horrible warfare there, but to see all these, and that's my finger, and to look at this, it was quite a sight. And that's an iconic picture of a Soviet soldier putting the flag up in Berlin. So again, same thing as Prague, the Sea of Red. Okay, you just don't want to be surrounded. There, but you know, if you military history, German troops are surrendering as fast as they can to the west, because what they don't want is they don't want to deal with anything over here. And that's something that we emphasize with our students. And Berlin was just an incredible city to study, and we met some great people in Berlin that taught great stories. And again, we had a great tour guide in Berlin too. So this is everywhere. This is everywhere in the older buildings in Berlin. Valkyrie, the plot to overthrow Hitler. There's a deep sense of regret, I think, with a lot of the people in Berlin that you speak history with. This is a monument that we took the picture of. General, anybody know his name? Von. Ever see the Valkyrie Project? Von Stauffenberg and the conspirators. And this is what, he tried to kill Hitler in the Wolf Lair in Eastern Prussia. We teach this to our students. If you're a German noble, at this time, you want Hitler gone. You're deeply embarrassed. You've been embarrassed since 1942-43. So one of the more famous assassination attempts that failed was of this, and he was executed in the courtyard. And that's where his statue is today.
The monuments in Berlin were something, I think Jeff's going to bring this up, but the monuments in Berlin were quite remarkable. They recently completed a Jewish memorial in Berlin, which is, it's basically an entire park, which is tremendous. There are countless numbers of neighborhood memorials for people. It was really something to see. Because like I was saying before, you didn't see it as much in some of the other places in Germany. Berlin was a little bit unique, with the exception of this, which is, you're...
Yeah, I mean, this was where Hitler's bunker was. Oops. The computer didn't like that. It was a parking lot now. So conspiracy folks say he got out. I don't think that was the case. But when we toured and we got to the bunker, it was literally, here's where Hitler died. Just that little sign. So that's one of the themes that we got from this is, you're looking at the Eagle's Nest, you're looking at the party grounds. It was, the documentation center. Some things were highlighted and some things weren't. And it didn't seem like there was that much of a rhyme or reason, or it was up to you to kind of analyze why things were. The documentation center in Berlin was incredible, by far the most resources. And we would spend, that was usually our day one, we'd find a documentation center and dig in, and we would take cameras and just literally, we have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pictures from the documentation centers for research. And then again, on day two, we'd take the tour.
And being, parents of kids and having, never would we be given the opportunity to be able to go spend hours in a documentation center in Berlin. If we were to do this as like a family trip with the kids, it's like, there's no chance.
It was like a challenge of stamina. Who could stay the longest? Who would sit
there and
get tired and sit and look down, and who could stay? No, it was a challenge, and it was heady information, and it was sad, and it was really, something important. So this to us now, other people are like, of course it was the Soviet War Memorial in Berlin because the Soviets occupied the city, but for a group that killed 200,000 Germans in Berlin, civilians and soldiers, to have a massive war memorial in the Great Park in Berlin was, to me, a little shocking. But I guess in the 90s, when everything, Germany was unified, they weren't going to tear down the Soviet war memorial. Again, this picture doesn't do it justice. The war memorial to the Soviets it's expansive. There's tanks. There's all sorts of Soviet documents there. Mm-hmm. So I did find it kind of surprising that they committed so many atrocities, so much murder, rape, and they have a big memorial still in Berlin. And then we saw we're leaving the American sector, mm-hmm. Berlin Wall, really nice to see. Nice museum, Berlin War Memorial Museum in Berlin. It goes through, this is a good kind of original piece of the wall with the checkpoints and everything else. And more of the wall. So a very different city than Bavaria. Bavaria, southern Germany, where we were was Munich and Nuremberg, medieval and beautiful. And Berlin, you could tell, rebuilt with the Soviet mindset. Everything was squared off, everything was gray. There is a little rebirth in the city center with, in the business areas, but for the most part, you see these kind of low rises all over the place in Berlin. And trip extension, this was a huge bonus for us. So after all was said and done and we settled up on the rental car, we still had money left for the trip extension. And Jim's going to talk about
that. So we were able to take a little bit of the money that we had left over, and the grant company was generous enough to let us go to Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C., we decided that we were going to take the opportunity to obviously go and sort of tie everything together by going to the Holocaust Museum, which had you been? You had been.
A long time ago.
A long time ago, yeah. I'd never been, and I was very anxious to get there and see that, not only from the fact that I've heard it's a tremendous experience, but also because I was curious to see, we went to a number of different places in Germany that try to tell you those stories or that show you those events. I was curious to see what the perspective of the United States was going to be and how they portrayed it to you. And it was phenomenal. It was absolutely phenomenal in the way that they did it. It was emotional. It was powerful. It was different. They want you to leave there with a certain feeling. They do a good job in bringing out the emotions and the stories of what went on, and you walk out of there feeling a heavy load. It's a heavy place to go, and they do a good job giving you that when you leave, and I think it's purposefully done. Even from the way in which you walk in, and there's sort of nobody there telling you where to go and what to do. You're just sort of confused. There's nobody that's like, here's where you go, here's where you almost have to ask somebody, excuse me, do you know where I'm supposed to be going here? And then they're very nice to help you, but they want you to get that sense of, what the heck am I doing here? Just to give you a little bit of confusion that must have been, and it's almost like you're walking off of a train as well. So they want you to feel that. They want you to feel that bit of uncomfortableness as you get in there. And I thought that was just remarkable in the way that they just brought up emotions about that event. Now in Germany, it was the same. You had a lot of that as well, but I think Jeff said it well when he said, you're left up to yourself to be able to kind of take what you want. They present you with so much information, so many stories, so many, as he said, heady documents of things that you're just like, I don't know if I can read another one of these stories. And it is a test of endurance, but it's up to you to kind of take what you want out of there. And I thought that was a powerful experience as well. You being able to be the one to decide how do you want to remember this historic event. That's what I took out of going to some of the places in Germany. But anyway, long story short, we were able to get this extension and go to Washington, D.C. Now, the neat part about this was a couple of things. One, we decided about a month before the trip when we wanted to go, and we said a great day for us to go would be Martin Luther King Day. We don't have school that day. We can go spend some time in the city on Martin Luther King Day and see if we can maybe get a professional day and take that Tuesday off as well and do some exploring. And that's what we were able to do, and it worked out really well. So we were really excited to be able to go there and spend a day. So ahead of time, if you've been following the news, there was kind of an important event beginning around a month before Martin Luther King Day, which was the impeachment of the president. And the trial, the impeachment trial. The impeachment had been going on, but the trial that was going to be held in the Senate was kind of up in the air as to when it was going to begin. And as Jeff and I were sort of looking at the date that we had planned and the things that we had booked in the city, we realized, man, we might get lucky here and get a chance to get to the city and see maybe the beginning of the impeachment trial in the Senate. Nah, we wouldn't be that lucky. We wouldn't be that lucky. We kept saying that to ourselves. So we said, you know what, while we're there, why don't we get in touch with our representative, Johanna Hayes, and see if she can hook us up with some passes to the White House or maybe the Senate building so we can go into the gallery or go into the House of Representatives and walk around. Because in order to go into the galleries, you need to have essentially a ticket from your representative. So we decided, let's do that. So we called and made arrangements with her, and she said, yep, come on in. We'll have tickets waiting for you. Just come in. We'll be here on the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Day. I don't think Johanna will be here. She's actually in Simsbury, believe it or not. But come on in and we'll give you the tickets. So we had everything booked. We were ready to go. Then all of a sudden, about a week before, they announced that the Senate trial is going to begin on the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Day. So Jeff and I looked at each other and we said, this is too good to be true. Like, there's no way we're going to be able to actually use those tickets, right, and get into the Senate. So we were worried that they weren't going to uphold their end of the bargain and give us these tickets. So we ended up going to Washington, D.C. We couldn't get a hold of anybody in Johanna's office because it was the weekend. They were gone. So we said, you know what, whatever. If we get in, we get in. If we don't, we don't. We're still going to have a tremendous experience in D.C. Day one, we explored. We saw the memorials. We went to the Holocaust Museum, which was tremendous. We went and visited the gravesite of one of our dear friends who passed away a couple of years ago from cancer, Clark Bashley, who taught at the high school, buried in Arlington. So we were the first ones into the cemetery. We were literally the whole place was just, it was ours. And so we had coffee with Clark, as we said, in the morning. And then just walked around 13.2 miles that day, just walking around the city and really taking it all in. So then the next day, we didn't really know what we were going to expect, but we got up bright and early. We went to Johanna Hayes' office, which is just outside of the Capitol. And we get there and knocked on the door, nobody there. So we're saying, all right, how long are we going to wait here for? And as we're getting onto the elevator to leave, the elevator door opens and somebody walks out and they start walking towards the office and we yell, we go, are you with the Johanna Hayes' office? She goes, yeah. Oh, are you the teachers? Yeah, come on in. So we came in, she gave us the tickets. And she said, I don't know if they're going to let you in, but these are the tickets. So best of luck to you. And so we ended up being able to, we got there early. We had to wait in line for about 2 hours. But they came down and they eventually said, okay, we're going to honor these tickets and you're going to be able to go in and watch the first hour and a half of the Senate impeachment trial. And we couldn't believe it. Like, as government teachers, to have that sort of luck was just something unbelievable. And we got a chance to walk in, we sat down, we watched the opening statements, and it was probably one of the most tremendous experiences of being part of politics that I could ever imagine. And as Gov teachers, we just kept sitting there like pinching ourselves, like, I can't believe we're in the Senate right now watching this happen. And it was just a remarkable experience to kind of bring it all together and kind of put some closure on really a remarkable trip. Completely unplanned and unexpected, but it was really kind of nice. The other thing that was great about it too is that we were in Washington, D.C. on Martin Luther King Day. It was awesome to be able to go there and see some of the exhibits, see some of the things that they had to celebrate Martin Luther King Day. Was pretty cool. And it started to, on the plane ride there and on the plane ride back, Jeff and I were kind of thinking about ways in which, what does this all mean? How does this tie into our trip? And we were able to come up with some pretty good thoughts on it all. I mean, if you look at the situations that were presenting themselves to, being in Washington, D.C. and being able to see how powerful and how important the United States government is to our country and the power of the United States Constitution, it makes you look at the events that took place, especially with Martin Luther King, and say, man, not only was he really smart in the way that he took the situations that were being presented to him and other African Americans, especially in the South, and that he was able to take really bad situations and do what he did with them is a real testament to the brilliance of him. Because, when faced with crummy situations, different leaders can do different things. And that's what we noticed when we were in Germany. That you can take a crummy situation and do horrible, horrible things with it because you can manipulate people into doing all sorts of things. And we noticed and we saw the power that can happen with that if you want to take it to the negative. Now you look at Dr. King. You look at the things that were being presented to him and the struggles that were being put upon him and people, especially African Americans, especially in the South. How does a leader like that react to that? What do you do in those situations? And what's remarkable is to see that not only did he turn to the positive of things, but he also realized the power of the United States Constitution, the power of our government to be able to use as a tool to fix the problems that were facing him and other people at this time. And I thought that bringing that together and just saying, wow, you got situations that are terrible from a perspective back in the 1930s and 1940s. What's the reaction? What are the leaders back then doing? And how do they take that situation? What do they do with it? And we saw some of the atrocities that came out of that. Then you come here and you say, man, we're seeing tons of people being oppressed and horrible things happening within our own country. How do we deal with that? And then you take somebody like Martin Luther King and you say, well, this is how you do it. You don't do it by scaring other people, by causing war, by causing hate. You do it by using the tools that we have, and the strongest tool that he had at his disposal was the United States government. And they stepped up to the plate and they helped him, and they helped pass major legislation in '64 and '65, backed up by the Supreme Court. And it was so cool to be in Washington, D.C. and see all of that firsthand on that day, to be able to really celebrate, to be able to celebrate it all. And I thought that was kind of a neat little tie back into some of the stuff that we had seen. So, yeah, that was our trip. And I think as far as doing what the grant wanted to do and enriching us as teachers to be able to have this experience on our own and be able to get what we got out of it, I know it's made teaching the stuff in class much more enjoyable as far as being able to put these perspectives of actually being there and seeing these things. It's made it more enjoyable for me, and I know that the students love hearing it. Anytime I've caught myself now saying it at least 50 times, oh, when Ozzy and I were here, when Ozzy and I were there, we did this, when we did that. And as soon as you mention that, the students perk up. They're like, all right, this is real. This guy was there, he did it. I'm gonna listen to this part of the story now. And they love hearing about it. And yeah, so, I give that spiel to the teachers. But I can also, give it to the travelers and all of you. And I'd highly recommend, if you get a chance, to go see some of the stuff, that you take advantage of it, because it was remarkable.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
We'll take any questions. And
That was great, guys.
Oh, thank you.
Would you give us, email us the free
You will
library?
email the free library.
And then,
I have the itinerary, I have the contacts, the
Yeah.
tour guides, it's all in the spreadsheet
I'll
with
post
the
it.
hotels and things like that. So it's a World War II trip. We had just an immense learning. As teachers, this is how you learn. You just have to, and for all of us, you have to be there, you have to do it a whole bunch of times. So it was just incredible. So questions on the trip? Yes, sir.
Who crashed the car?
The rental car situation was in Nuremberg, and there was no Hertz in Nuremberg to really drop it off. So he and I dropped it off in a lot, just this little drop lot, brand new Volvo, and. The next morning we woke up to check our bill and they were like, oh, you have $1,800 of damage on the car. And we took tons of pictures before just to kind of prove that it was in a safe zone. But to deal with the international Hertz and we had travel insurance, we had car insurance, we had all different things working for us. So it wasn't a big deal at the end, but when you're there and you kind of we dealt with it and got over it. But it was literally right by those Zeppelin fields, by the Nazi Party grounds. We dropped the car off and we had to walk back into the old town of Nuremberg, and it was just it was just something that probably happens to a lot of people on trips. So
Czech beer is remarkable, by the way. I liked it better than German beer, I think.
Perspective on those Zeppelin fields. Give me an
oh,
idea
the
as to how
size,
big
it's like
Oh.
going to the biggest stadium that you could imagine in the US, like the LA Coliseum, something like that, built with that type of architecture and just immense.
You know what actually it reminded me more of? Like a motor speedway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a huge motor speedway is this
desolate now.
desolate, but not only desolate, but like there's still remnants, like I was saying before, of what they wanted to do. There's pallets of bricks and things that they were going to use to build it more. It's really something. It's really something.
They were quarrying a lot of it from Czechoslovakia at that time. Like they needed to get this moving. But once the war started, September 1939, everything stopped. They never met back there. There were no more Nazi Party rallies. After that, there was no blood Sundays. There was no indoctrination of the SS. So once the war started, Nuremberg really became not an important part to the Nazi Party. Bombed heavily. A lot of this was in Bavaria, and that was Patton's time. Patton went down south and did this. You know, it was a Catholic area versus a Protestant area. I think there was with Hitler, there was a lot of animosity towards Berlin, the area of Berlin, and the prosperity. Berlin had a great
thriving art communities, like the kinds of things that,
we learned a lot about that. It was called the Golden 20s in Berlin. Music and theater, and dance and cabarets, and you name it, anything that you wanted to get into, it happened in Berlin. So for these World War I veterans and an industrial kind of collapse in the South, there was animosity towards Berlin, and especially the leftist parties. The liberal parties of the Weimar Republic were not in the cards. Hitler was a very conservative, the Nazi Party is a conservative party, very anti-Northern Europe. So very different. So when you're traveling, you notice the differences between Bavaria and the north. And also when you get into the Eastern Bloc there, when you get into former East Germany, when you the train ride, this was excellent to just go from Prague to Berlin and to see what it was like in those areas, just different architecture, different feel, just a great trip.
Prague wasn't bombed? What about the other cities?
No.
85% bombed.
So it still has such a great old school, it's so old. There's so much original,
We stayed in a monastery that was built in the 1100s.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And the roads and everything, it's just, it's hard to explain. It's a very walkable city, but every turn is just breathtaking. You're like, this is incredible. The architecture, the history, it's.
Those are the cities that you treasure. Like even like Paris. Paris was turned into an open city, so it was never bombed. It was just the Nazis took Paris, so you get original Paris. First, when you're in England and you go through London, it's just all rebuilt.
Yep. And
go ahead.
Munich and Nuremberg especially, you look at those cities and you can just tell, I mean, they're beautiful, they're clean, they're nice, but they're new. You know, they're not, they did a great job in making them look, traditional when they rebuilt them, but you can get the sense for the newness of them.
That would be like the old town hall in Munich, and it all rebuilt. So they rebuilt the new town hall and the old town hall to the original kind of specs, which was, a testament to post-World War II West Germany. So you get that feel. So pretty unbelievable. Munich, I mean, we walked outside one night and the opera was getting out, and it was just like unbelievable. Beautiful people walking around with drinks on the steps, and it was intermission. It was, again, these 90-degree nights, and just unbelievable city. Munich probably was my favorite place to go, just as a tourist. And the one thing we didn't do in Munich was we didn't have a tour guide, so we just did Munich on our own. Our hotel had bikes. Most of the hotels had bikes, so you could bike. We biked through the parks. Learned about a lot of different things, different culture, different. On hot days in Munich, not many clothes.
In your interaction with the average German citizen, now that we're, 3 generations
Right.
removed from World War II, what is their take on that whole experience? Is it so distant to them that they don't have any connection to it?
Well,
It's still kind of a national, there was a word in the 60s, and 50s and 60s about like a national shame that they had. Is that still prevalent, or is there enough distance now?
Can you re-ask the question a little bit, because you're from
what's that?
Can you re-ask the question?
Yeah, the question that was asked was more was along the lines of what's in today, how do people in Germany how do they perceive the things that we saw in the war, I imagine, and some of the other things. We had a couple of interactions with people, and I think it differed depending on who you talked to, and I guess the places that we went. For example, in Nuremberg, when we dropped off our car and we got a little bit lost as we're walking around, we kept referring to the Zeppelin fields as the party grounds, the rally grounds. And a woman that helped us find a bus and find our way back to where we needed to go said, they don't call it the rally grounds, they call those the Zeppelin fields. And so it was interesting that, and it's like, okay, I understand that there's a Zeppelin field, but every picture I've ever seen, these are the rally grounds. I mean, that's what they are. And so you get a little bit of that where maybe they're not going to refer to things in that manner all the time. And another good example of that is the Eagle's Nest. A lot of people in Berchtesgaden, they don't call it the Eagle's Nest because that's what Hitler called it. They call it the Tea Garden, right? I believe the Tea Garden, because that's originally when they decided not to tear it down. It was originally opened as it was opened up again as like a restaurant or a tea restaurant. And so they call it the Tea Garden. They don't like to refer to it as the Eagle's Nest. So you do get a little bit of that.
I would say with that question, the thing about the documentation of everything,
right.
The Nazi Party documented everything. So I think the level of education on what happened is really high. So pretty much the average citizen that you would see and speak to, and especially if you're kind of in these type of sites, they knew it all. And that was a takeaway.
They do know their history. They're not necessarily celebrating a lot of the things that we saw, but they know what was going on.
And that's why those documentation centers it was so different. The Holocaust Museum is Americanized, in my opinion. You walk through it and it takes you right through exactly where you need to be
right.
in a chronological order. The documentation centers in Germany are like, you're going to dig in and you get immense amounts of
all the information, all the primary sources.
And there's libraries of information. So just a little bit more of a self-service learning experience versus a full-service learning experience. But the citizens were up and onto things. So most of our tour guides were expats. They were English-speaking expats, and that was helpful for us.
Right.
Yes.
So
this is an expert here now.
We lived for 2.5 years in Munich, and it was interesting when we'd have American visitors come. One of the things that we would do is go to Dachau, and our neighbors were really upset with that. Like, why are you going there? Why do you have to even pay attention to that? So
there's that feel. I would agree.
That really caught me by surprise because we pay attention to it so it won't happen again.
Yeah.
But they were really disturbed that we were taking our visitors there. Well, our visitors wanted to go there, so that was interesting. And then they have a couple of tours through Munich of the White Rose tour, where you can get Hitler's presence, just the Hitler tour through Munich and what he did, and his art gallery, because he'd been an art student. Got kicked out.
Never accepted.
Never accepted, which sort of explains why he hated Berlin.
Right, exactly.
That's where the artists were.
Yep.
That's where he wanted to be.
Yeah.
And, and he built an art museum in Munich that is a square.
Yeah, that was my big takeaway was I couldn't believe how Berlin was in the 20s, how cosmopolitan and how artsy and how much. I just read a book called The Red Orchestra. It was like unbelievable of what was going on. Because you teach in school, you teach hyperinflation, you teach the worldwide depression, but it wasn't, Berlin was probably, like New York City.
Yeah, it's like New York City, it's like, nowhere else.
Right.
Where to go. This is
They
also interesting. One of the things about the U.S. forces, no one was up to the Eagle's Nest until 99. U.S. forces left in 96. The German government was really happy that the U.S. military was there because they thought this would be an area of neo-Nazism,
Right.
a rebirth. So it was almost like the military, the U.S. military was guarding from that happening for 50 years, and that's why they had to build a golf course to take some time when they were over there. But yeah, that was an incredible, Mr. Gray.
So when you were in the documentation centers, which one of you reads German?
Oh, they have it all. You pick.
Different answers for that.
Yeah. Well, you pick your language. And a lot of them have, you put the headphones on and you walk around and it'll walk you through it. They do a very good job, multiple different languages, very high tech, yeah.
When you get up to a set of documents, you have headsets on, and literally the text will be read to you in your language of choice. And then you go to the next document, so it is really, that was a big question for us.
Mm-hmm.
The Ober-Salzburg Document Center over in Berchtesgaden was unbelievable. And then they took us down into
the bunkers,
bunker,
yeah.
which was for the last stand. I mean, that's what a lot of people thought the last stand would be in Bavaria because it was the hotbed of and the epicenter of Nazism. It never turned out to be that way, but we were down in those bunkers looking at how they had the machine gun turrets underground up the staircases on the sides, and so soldiers were coming in on the stairs. They had everything in crossfire.
They were going to mount their last stand from Berchtesgaden. Even the 506 and the 101st Airborne, when they got in there, that's what they were expecting. I mean, they were expecting that. They were expecting to be ambushed. They were expecting there to be a pretty good resistance, but nothing. They
you
were
see
gone.
a lot of these, they kind of look like ski lodges, that type. You could just like that. That's what I told Jim when we were picking where I go. I don't want us to stay in any place that would smell like a ski lodge. So this Kapinski, this place,
Top of the line.
incredible, and the learning that happened in this area for us was great. And we also got to mountain bike up into the Alps from there, and there's a lot going on. So if you've never been to the Bavarian Alps or Salzburg, Austria, you want to go. And it's easy to get to from Munich, and Munich's a great place to fly into, a really nice airport, and just incredible. I'm glad we took the time to go down to this, Sarah.
Well, my question is, I guess since you can't read German, it's not like you could bring the documents weren't something you could take pictures of and bring back, right?
A lot of the documents, a document center would be a very high-end, it wasn't a museum, but it would be like placard of different pictures with explanations. Everything was in English too. So you'd have a German and an English.
So unless you want to go in the
English
basement and like really.
English is
Right.
everywhere. Yeah, right. And the one that was most like a library was in Berlin. And you got down, and that was like, it was like this. But the big surprise was the newspaper articles we found that were not promoting Dachau, but saying like, this is what's happened.
Right.
We're moving people here for the effort, for the Nazi Party effort. So it wasn't you teach students sometimes like this was a mystery, and it was just, we couldn't believe this was happening during the war. I mean, the citizens of Germany knew, and I imagine we would have a spy network in Germany that would be on top of this. Maybe not, but.
And they're all, most of the camps were along rail lines. It's not like they were prevalent. People knew. People knew.
So there were a lot of aha moments. Yes.
Is there anything you've changed that you used to teach one way and now that you decided that you should be teaching in a different way, or saying the story like you're saying now that you heard that the documents were out there in Germany and now people knew? Is there anything else?
Just one example of an expat who was our tour guide, who was a former military guy, American military guy in Nuremberg. Just the conversation about the healthcare system is a nice one to pass along to the students, because you talk about a change in healthcare in America, And he was basically saying, well, in Germany, you're taking a person, it depends on how much money you make. The more you make, the more you pay into the healthcare system. So it's not just socialized medicine. And his wife was in need of a hip surgery, and it was like, he's like, come on, it's been like a year, it's been like 13 or 14 months, she needs the surgery, it wasn't happening. So he was kind of giving us the side of like, this socialized medicine is not great, you know, for emergency services. So just like little conversations like that, when you're teaching in politics, you can bring it back. So a lot of the conversations, we ate with a old British man who grew up during World War II. His parents were, he would basically find the 101st Airborne was near his village in England, and he would go around during the day and pick up cigarette butts for his parents, and he'd bring back a can of half-smoked cigarettes and chocolate, and he was bringing all that back to his parents. And so we got that from him, and then he was also talking about Brexit.
Right.
And Trump was on everybody's mind when we were there this summer. They called Trump being this and that and this, and there were all sorts of opinions. Everybody had different opinions about the current political climate in the world. So that was good. But yeah, all different things in World War II, like World War II history, all little snippets. Like we teach a lot with Patton.
Yep.
So to see Patton and the Czech and to know what it was like to, you know, Pilsner, Pilsen, a lot of connections, line of contact.
Geographically speaking, like going there and the geography of things started to make a little more sense to me.
Yeah.
Jeff brought up the good point about how, you know, when you're there and you look and see how easy it would have been for the Soviets to go right into Berlin, and the fact that like there's that little lag time there, you know, that there it wasn't as, there was a lot more that was being thought about in what the aftermath of this war was going to look like before we kind of knew that was going to happen. That was something I learned. You know, we always I never teach it. I never would have taught it that way. I always say, all of a sudden, there we go, we're in Berlin, and then the war's over, and Berlin's divided, and now let's talk about the Cold War. There's more to it than that, and I always wondered those things, like, well, how did so simply people just decide that they wanted to be part of the Soviet Union, or that they wanted to be, you know, communist? Like what happened there? You know, like there was indoctrination. There was things going on where the minds of the war had an idea that the war was coming to an end, and let's start thinking about next step. And that was something that I didn't quite get until later on. So.
Because when you teach U.S. history, the less transition you have between unit and unit, you know, if the units can kind of roll with each other, the kids are way more engaged. It's not like, oh, now we're starting this. This is like right here. This is where we're heading in our class coming up in the next couple of weeks. It's all, you know, it's been a buildup. So. And
it is difficult because we also teach a wide level of learning styles and learning and kids, some of which are, you know, on different ends of the spectrum as far as what they're capable of, you know, consuming, as far as when we're doing this, you know, doing it this way, some kids we would have lost them hours ago, you know, and to be able to still try to get to them in some way, shape, or form is something that this helps with, because you can bring more emotion into it. You can bring more stories, telling stories about, like I said, just mentioning that we were there. And when I was there and I saw this, means a lot more to a student than when, you know, just showing a PowerPoint that somebody else created. So that helps as well, you know, and the kids, it just validates the fact that we are historians. You can learn a ton about history. Learning about history doing this stuff has helped me have a better understanding of, like I said before, it makes me ask more questions about our government, about, you know, I teach government, but this experience had an impact on the way that I look at that as well. So very impactful from a teaching perspective. In some cases more obvious than others, but it certainly was enriching for those experiences.
Oof. This is an aside, but if you teach about this, do you teach the kids about Avon Oaks Farm School being a hospital for the blind during the war, and, you know, aircraft?
Yeah, the home front stuff it's wonderful. Yeah, I actually just did it today. We talked about the home front. We do it, not only did we do it with the war, Yeah, Waterbury, Ken Burns did his thing on the war and the importance of the industrial towns like Waterbury. Talking about, we do that even with, we try to bring local history into every unit, but I just remember doing in the Great Depression even, talking about the impact that some of the works WPA had and some of the buildings even around our area that were part of that, and looking into some local stories on World War II. We talk about the Baton Bridge. We talk about, we link that stuff into it just because, again, sort of the same way like when we talk about how when we were there, well, if we can tie local perspective in, they love it. The kids love it, And there's tons of history here from way back when till right now. I mean, we try to find it.
And
So.
the memorial in town, so a great extra credit assignment is go etch the memorial and try to research the Simsbury.
So I have a resource to offer you.
Wonderful.
My uncle, a great uncle, was an American soldier at the liberation of Dachau.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, before he died, my cousin recorded and transcribed some of his thoughts. And it's on a website that my cousin said, if you'd like, I will connect you to that website.
Wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Just send it to Simsbury Free Library.
I will.
And they'll shoot it to us.
Okay.
That's a great.
Yeah. Be wonderful. Thank you.
Storyteller, and it's very interesting.
Awesome.
All right, well, hey.
Oop, one more.
Oh, one more? Yeah, sorry.
I just had one little comment that, you talked about having an aha moment of thinking about things differently. So when we were living in Germany, I was talking with the father of a new friend of mine there, and he was East German, the East German Army. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
He's the enemy.
Yeah.
But at the end of the war, he found himself in West Germany, and he couldn't get home.
Yeah.
Everything just kind of like shut down. He couldn't, so that's where he ended up.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, all those people were lost.
Oh, yeah.
And Berliner is the one on the wrong side of the wall.
Yeah, and I'm.
Get back from work that night.
But
It was years
stayed
before.
for 45 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy, being naive, and again, about the geography thing, you think of the Berlin Wall, I always thinking of it, it's like, oh, it's just a wall that separates, East from West Germany, but it encompassed the entire thing, the whole city, it went around the whole thing, and everybody was in there, you weren't getting out, it was.
I didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
It just went around West Berlin, the whole entire, West Berlin was in a capsule.
Yeah, we were like, oh, we'll see maybe little sections here and there that still might be there. It's everywhere. The Berlin Wall is everywhere in Berlin. It's still very much part of the whole landscape there.
We also made friends with another young couple that before the wall fell, they would take Sunday drives and try to drive through the border.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, maybe they won't. Oh, sorry, you're gonna go back. Just hearing them tell that story of, well, let's just try to drive.
Yep. No, it was.
It wasn't possible.
Nope. No, but it was great. I never thought I'd be able to get a chance to see Berlin, and do this. It was so cool.
Well,
really cool. Thank you guys for listening to us.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.